So let's talk about LSD. We're going to take a look today at what the effects of LSD can have on the brain and what it shows about the mind. Could it actually show that the brain doesn't create the mind, but rather that the mind creates the brain? We're going to see what a neurosurgeon has to say, what new research has to say, and we're going to see what Hyperionism has to say, and how we can possibly use this tool of LSD to understand not the brain, but the mind better. And real quick, I want to do my disclaimer, of course. Make sure that you do nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, FYI, okay? So let's get that out there. So whenever one is doing psychedelics of this nature, it's very important to make sure that one remembers the three S's: sitter, set, and setting. Sitter means the person that you're with, set means your mindset, and setting means your environment. You have to be very comfortable psychologically, socially, environmentally, because when one is under the influence of these things, they're in a very psychologically suggestive state. So if you have an uncomfortable mindset, an uncomfortable environment, or someone that you're with that you're uncomfortable with, you can have a very bad time. So we're going to be looking at some information today on LSD and what it can tell us about the mind. And the important thing to understand that what is essentially happening here is when you partake in substances such as LSD, what it's doing is it is relaxing the linear processing function of the brain. So basically, we as monadic minds connect to this body via the brain. The brain is our interface for us as minds to interact in the physical world. If we're thinking in a video game metaphor, you have the video game and then you have the person playing the video game. The controller is the interface between the player playing the game and then the game world. The controller is the interface. Likewise, in this reality, the brain is our interface as eternal monadic minds to interact in the space-time world. So what LSD does is it starts to alter and mess with, adjust, edit that controller, that interface. And so what the brain is, in addition to being a interface, is it's also a filtering mechanism. Because what you need to do is to be able to you as an eternal mind, as a system of eternal energy, are a universal entity in the frequency domain, the domain of mind. It's the code, and like a code is everywhere. But to be able to interact in the space-time holos, you have to filter that down to be able to focus on particular localized events. Because you have to know what's happening in your immediate surrounding, what's happening around you. So what happens is the brain really filters via the senses, via all these different factors of the brain. You as a mind get filtered and reduced so that you can focus on your localized environment and what's around you. So you have these, a sort of a frequency processing that's connected with you as an eternal mind, the unconscious, the realm of dreams, the collective unconscious, which is all of our minds together, the source domain. And then you have the linear function, the linear processing system, which deals with the, your external environment, things in your immediate surrounding. What you can see, touch, hear, smell, using language to process information, all these different things. Now, what happens when you engage in these substances is that it relaxes the linear processing function. And what it does is it opens you up to more of that frequency processing. It opens you up to the unconscious realm. And this puts you, first of all, in a very suggestive state, which is why you need to make sure you're around people that you trust, because you don't have that firewall. Your linear processing is your firewall, sort of. And this is how hypnosis works. When people want to hypnotize you, they put you in a suggestive state to bypass that linear processing. And likewise with LSD, it naturally relaxes that, and then you start to gain access to your personal unconscious, and then also the deep collective unconscious, where archetypal imagery is stored. That's why you can have access to very archetypal sort of things. You start to get more access to the mathematical nature of reality as filters start being stripped away. You start seeing things in new ways. Dream content or just unconscious content starts getting projected onto the world, so it's kind of like you're dreaming but awake at the same time, which is how hallucinations occur. You're in essence projecting your inner content onto the outer world, and all of this is happening. And what is essentially the question that we're asking today is, can this help us understand the mind? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And we're going to look at an article by a neuroscience scientist and new research about this. But the important thing to understand, though, is that these psychedelic substances, they are a tool, okay? They're not an answer in themselves. There are many people who treat psychedelic substances like a religion. That if they do this, they're just automatically going to become enlightened and it's the answer to everything. That's not the case, okay? Psychedelics are very powerful tools, and that's great, and that's amazing. But we have to remember that it is a tool. What else is a tool? Well, guess what? Your smartphone, your iPhone, whatever you use, that's a tool. And what it depends on is the person that's using it. Someone can use a smartphone to enrich their lives by watching documentaries, reading books, or they can waste all their time on it and actually become less intelligent. So sort of a similar thing is going on with psychedelics. What psychedelics do is relax your linear processing and give you access to more experiences. Now, it's up to you what to do with those experiences that you have. Life is all about experiences, and we can utilize those experiences or squander those experiences. And so someone who's not very smart can have all the experiences in the world, but it's not going to help them at all. They'll just be like, oh, wow, that was trippy, man. What it is it's up to us to use these in a healthy way as tools. Remember, don't do anything illegal. Also, remember, guys, if you're not comfortable, you don't have to do these things. I'm not saying that psychedelics are necessary in any way. I'm just providing this information for those who are interested in them. So don't feel like this is something that you have to do if you don't want to. Certainly don't. You don't need to do anything you aren't comfortable with. But they are tools. And so someone who does these things, it's up to us to then later reflect on our experiences and then use our reasoning to learn something about our world, learn something about ourselves. But you see, what we're doing is that what happens is the substances aren't directly speeding up our evolution. What the substances are doing are just giving us new experiences. It is up to us as minds to then reflect on those experiences to be able to utilize it properly. If you just drop acid and be like, woo, this is fun, it's just like watching a junk TV on Netflix or something. But if you critically examine those experiences, question them, use logic and reason to examine them, see what it's telling you about yourself, see what it's telling you about your psyche, see what it's telling you about your unconscious, see what it's showing you about the world. And then when your linear processing function comes back online, use your reason to be able to order and structure and knit those experiences into something that can be useful to your evolution. Then it's completely different. So you see the difference is that, once again, it's just a tool, just like the internet is a tool. You can use the internet to waste time and time and time just watching TikTok videos all day long, or you can use it to read books, watch documentaries, learn mathematics, read philosophy. Same thing with psychedelics. If you just drop them all day, a lot of people do this, and it's just like a party for them. Or you then, as a mind, can reflect on those experiences to gain information. So the whole idea is that these are just tools, and they can be fantastic tools, but it has to be remembered that they are not answers in and of themselves. There are so many people, a lot of New Agers out there, a lot of, there's a whole psychedelic community out there that treats these substances like holy sacraments, as if they are the answers themselves, as if all you have to do is these drugs, and that's just gonna change everything. And that's not the case. They're tools like everything else. And that's great. You just have to realize that they are, in fact, tools. But that being said, they are very powerful tools. And they open us up to being able to have more of a direct access to our own unconscious and the collective unconscious. And why is this? Because again, what it's doing is it's relaxing the linear processing of the brain. It's relaxing basically the filtering mechanism of the brain, and thereby allowing us greater access to our own unconscious content and the source singularity itself. And so let's take a look at this article that talks about new research regarding LSD in the brain. And I want to point out that this article is written by a neuroscientist, Michael Egnor. So we're talking about recent research on the mechanism by which LSD alters the brain and the mind, quoting Aldous Huxley, who noted that LSD lowers the efficiency of the brain as an instrument for focusing the mind on the problems of life. So you see, this is what the brain does. The brain, it filters you as an eternal mind to be able to focus on things having to do with your avatar world, your avatar life, what's going on around you, what you can see, touch, smell, and hear, what's going on in your immediate vicinity, problems of work, social life. And quoting Aldous Huxley, what LSD, it lowers the efficiency of the brain as an instrument for focusing the mind on the problems of life. And so what you're doing is, since you're lowering, you're making the brain filter lessen, you're opening yourself up to the frequency domain. You're opening yourself up to universals. You're opening yourself up to ideas dealing with elements that are far greater than your localized environment and the mundane world around you. So the research conducted at Cornell University confirms what has been called the Rebus model of psychedelics. Rebus is a rough acronym for relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. The model proposes that the brain is essentially a prediction engine for daily life. So do you see how the brain is always associated as a tool as a practical tool for survival, is what it is. It's for your daily life, what's around you, what's going on in your environment. In this model, the brain processes information from the senses to help us understand the world. In doing so, it must take shortcuts and make predictions to enable quick perceptions and efficient responses. Psychedelic drugs suppress the ability of the brain to streamline perception and understanding. So I always want to emphasize what psychedelics are doing. They are actually making the brain less efficient, and thereby opening up you as an eternal mind. Because the brain limits and filters you as an eternal mind. But that's exactly how you're able to get around in this world. If you weren't limited and filtered, you would know everything that's going on all across the universe, and guess what? You wouldn't be able to focus on what's around you. You wouldn't be able to have your daily interactions. You wouldn't be able to drink your cup of coffee. The only reason why you're able to drink your cup of coffee is because you are limited, filtered, and focused. That's the difference. That's what linear processing allows you to do. It's you're limited, filtered, and focused. And LSD lessens that, removes that filter. So you're no longer as limited and filtered and focused, but now you're opened up to the frequency processing functions. And, you know, this is why you have all the marvelous experiences that you do. So as the researchers put it, our findings provide support for a fundamental theory of the mechanism of action of psychedelics by showing that LSD flattens the brain's energy landscape, allowing for more facile and frequent state transitions and more temporarily diverse brain activity. So one of the investigators described the effect as flattening the landscape over which the brain can roam. The drug makes it easier for the mind to transcend mundane perceptual habits and see the world in greater detail. Thus, they enabled people to break out of repetitive thought. This work, whatever its other merits, lends credence to an understanding of the mind-brain relationship that goes back centuries. It was stated perhaps most clearly by the Oxford philosopher Ferdinand Schiller in 1891, when he proposed that matter, all right, matter, the material, and remember the brain is matter, matter is not what produces consciousness, but what limited and confines its intensity within certain limits. And I can't stress the importance of this enough. So don't take that lightly. Reflect on that again. Matter, the brain, which is matter, does not generate the mind. It does not generate consciousness. What matter, the brain, does is limits and confines its intensity within certain limits. And that's the key to understanding you as an eternal mind. You are an eternal entity that has interfaced with the brain, that has limited and confined your intensity. And that might seem like a bad thing, but the upshot to this is that it allows you to interact in the physical world. Because without being limited and confined, you wouldn't be able to focus on the details of everything going on around you and your immediate vicinity. That's what an avatar does. It localizes an eternal mind, a monadic mind, what you would call a soul. Schiller argued that brain injuries are best understood as preventing the manifestation of consciousness rather than as extinguishing it. So when someone has brain damage and it's their ability to have consciousness is damaged, most people think that brain injuries are extinguishing the mind or extinguishing consciousness. No, that's not the case. It's preventing the manifestation of consciousness. And so again, you can imagine it like the video game, the controller, and the person controlling that. If the controller is damaged, well, it's preventing the manifestation of you, the game controller, using your game avatar to interact in the world. But it's not actually damaging you. Likewise, with a brain injury, your mind, you as an eternal mind, are not damaged, but it's preventing you from interfacing correctly with the material world. Just like, if your controller got damaged, a couple of the buttons got stuck or something, you wouldn't be able to interact in that game world as well. And I love this metaphor right here. Schiller saw the brain as a sort of magnifying glass focusing sunlight on the sidewalk. And that's so cool. If you think of sunlight, think of the sun. Think of you as an eternal mind as the sun. You as an eternal mind are the sun, all-pervading light. But when you use a magnifying glass, it takes that and focuses sunlight onto a particular point on the sidewalk. So that light has been vastly confined and condensed. But what it's allowing you to do is focus on a particular point. That's what your brain allows you. You as an eternal mind are limitless. But when you connect to an avatar, you are now able to focus on a particular point, which, again, is this a bad thing? Not necessarily. This is what allows us to experience each other in particularity, individuality, and multiplicity. It's a mode of experience. We wouldn't be able to have the experiences that we do without this reduction valve. So what LSD does, it's the reverse of the, as the magnifying glass focuses and intensifies. Doesn't intensify, but focus intensifies on a certain point. But you can see how it's a limiting mechanism compared to the all-pervading light of the sun. So LSD is sort of reversing this process of the magnifying glass, where it's lessening the focus on a point, and it's having opening you up to this more all-pervading experience. This is why on LSD it can be very difficult to, say, have a conversation or follow logical processes, or if you're ever talking with someone, it can be hard to order and structure your thoughts. If you're talking with someone, you can have a very hard time ordering and structuring your thoughts. That's because the linear processing mode is being reduced. But you may have experiences of having unity with the wholeness and the entirety of existence. And there you go. I mean, that's what it is in a nutshell. And we can understand this mathematically through the Fourier transform. What you're doing is you're switching from a focus on space-time functions, dealing with localized reality, to frequency functions, dealing with a non-local mental reality. So this dualist view has been endorsed by other philosophers and scientists, including French philosopher Henri Bergson and American psychologist and philosopher William James. The recent research at Cornell supports that perspective. It is evidence for a dualist and even an idealist view of the mind and the brain. And this is freaking exciting. Excuse me. But no, this is really exciting because, as I tell you, this is where mainstream research is getting closer and closer to what we have been saying for years. Because not only are they saying, is it evidence for a dualist point of view, but even an idealist point of view. And Hyperianism is not a dualism, it is an idealism. And so, as you all know, the pervading paradigm is materialism, that the world is all matter and that's it. Mind isn't real, it's just an illusion generated by matter. However, this research, is pointing towards other viewpoints, namely the viewpoints of dualism and idealism. What is dualism? Dualism is the idea that there are two things, mind and matter, and that mind and matter interact with each other. Now, this is a fallacious point of view. It's better than materialism, but it's a fallacious point of view. This dualist point of view really started with Plato. It was popularized by Descartes, but it faces a huge fallacy known as the interaction problem. If mind and matter are truly distinct substances, then there would be no mechanism by which they could interact, because they are, if something is truly unique and truly different in every possible way, they would share no common properties. And if it shares no common properties, then there's no way for them to interact. So dualism, it's better than materialism, but it's still a very fallacious point of view. However, idealism, which is what our point of view is, and Hyperianism's point of view, is, and it's great that they're pointing this out, because usually idealism is not taken seriously. But as you can see, it is evidence for a dualist and even idealist view of the mind and the brain. What the idealist point of view is that all reality is mind, and matter is an illusion generated by the mind. And how could that be? Well, just think about a dream. A dream is a material world, but it's not actually material. It's generated by the mind. That's what it says about this collective reality. This collective reality that's so-called matter is actually generated by the mind. So the brain, even though it seems like matter, isn't actually matter at all. It is a manifestation of mind, a structure of mind that has generated within itself in order to reduce itself. It's simply a mathematical function that the mind generated in order to limit and confine itself so that it can experience itself in its own multiplicity. And this view is what's being talked about here. And I want to remind you that this article I'm reading is not some woo-woo. This is Cornell research. And this article is written by Michael Egnor, a neuroscientist, PhD neuroscientist. Not that any of that matters. I mean, that's ad hominem to think that that would matter. But that means something to a lot of people out there, a lot of mainstream people out there. It's like, ooh, wow, ooh, a neuroscientist said it, so now it must be true. You know, don't listen to the guy without eyebrows. It's the guy with the lab coat said it. So, but you see what I'm saying is that slowly, mainstream science is starting to catch up. We have direct access only to our thoughts, not to material objects. And that's important to understand, because you might think, well, wait, what do you mean we have direct access to our thoughts only, not material objects? Yeah, we do. I can see material objects all around me right now. I see the cup, I see the chair, I see the lights, I see the camera, I see pens and paper, I see my phone, I see the walls. What are you talking about? Of course I have direct access to material objects. No, you don't. No, you do not. All of that is being filtered by your mind. You do not have direct access to the objects around you. Everything around you is simply a thought in your mind, a representation that your mind has constructed. The cup that you're looking at right now, you don't have direct access to the cup. You only have a structure of thought that your mind generated for you to experience. So you have direct access not to material objects. You have direct access to thoughts. Material objects only come to you indirectly once that they have been given to you and constructed as thoughts that you can experience. And that's important to remember. Science is so about empirical observation, but matter has never once been directly observed. And that is something that you should think about very deeply, because that is, I can't stress enough how important that is. Matter has not once been directly observed. So much for empiricism, so much for materialism. It is only our thoughts that we have access to. Our understanding of the function of the brain is always secondhand. We experience our thoughts, which suggests the ontological priority of mind over matter. And I love that this is coming from a mainstream source here. The idealist viewpoint is certainly inconsistent with the various crude materialistic theories of the mind and brain. Perhaps even the most robust dualist theories have the situation backwards. The brain does not generate the mind. The mind precedes the brain, and the brain constrains and focuses the mind so that we can function normally in the material world. And once again, I love that this is written. Okay, remember, once again, this is Michael Egnor, professor of neurosurgery. This is not, some woo-woo quack or anything like that. The brain does not generate the mind precedes the brain, and the brain constrains and focuses the mind so that we can function normally in the material world. The view of the mind-brain relationship dovetails nicely with extensive research on near-death experiences, which suggests that dysfunction of the brain expands the mind rather than extinguishes it. Once again, dysfunction of the brain, error, expands the mind rather than extinguishing it. That should not be a surprise. The idea that in order to experience spiritual reality more profoundly, one must suppress mundane activities of the mind. And the brain has been a core characteristic of the spiritual practices of mystics and contemplatives for thousands of years. Now, I want to emphasize, when we're talking about spiritual reality here in Hyperianism, that's not some woo-woo land of angels with wings and God and stuff like that. What it simply is, this is a mathematical reality, so it's a mathematical domain, it's a frequency domain. And we can define the so-called spiritual domain, if you want to call it that, completely mathematically, logically, and rationally via Fourier transforms. So I want to make that clear. This is all logical, rational, and above all mathematical. It is refreshing to see that some modern neuroscientists, such as these investigators at Cornell, are considering the implications of their science objectively and are coming to acknowledge, at least implicitly, that the materialist understanding of the brain is not only incoherent philosophy, but junk neuroscience. And I love that. I fucking love that. I fucking love to hear that, coming from a neuroscientist. That the materialist idea of reality, that reality is matter and that's it, and that the brain is material and generates the mind and consciousness, not only incoherent philosophy, but junk neuroscience. So what is the brain? The brain is actually simply a mathematical structure generated by the mind in order to localize itself so that it can experience the collective dream world that it generated for itself. All of us together as the collective, as the absolute, as the universal idealist neural network of existence. The neural network of existence, through its various monadic modes, generated this collective dream world. But then guess what? Once you have generated a collective dream world, you want to experience that dream world, right? Well, you can't experience that dream world until you localize, constrain, and focus yourself. And to be able to localize, constrain, and focus yourself, you have to have an interface and you have to have a filtering mechanism, and that is what the brain is. Through evolution, the brain was generated, developed, and allowed us to focus, interact with, and be able to experience this collective world. So what does LSD allow us to do? LSD and various psychedelics allow us to relax the linear processing functions of the brain that are focused on localization, that are focused on space-time functions, and allow us access to the frequency domain. Allow us access to the unconscious. Allow us access to the source singularity. Allow us access to the collective unconscious. And while amazing that is, just always remember that it is a tool and not an answer itself. And it is up to us as thinking, rational beings to be able to use that tool in a healthy and productive way. Because it can be used in very unhealthy and very unproductive ways. You can see that there are, I know so many people who just drop this stuff all the time. They just use it as a party drug, and they're frying their brains, and they're not becoming enlightened at all. They're just dropping this stuff like it's a roller coaster ride. They don't give a shit. But then look at, someone like Michael Egnor, who uses his rational faculties to examine the implications that this has and use it as fuel and data to understand reality, the mind, and existence in a highly evolved, intelligent, and rational way. So, that is what LSD does. That is what these things do. They allow us access. They lessen our linear processing function. They lessen our connection to the space-time functions, and thereby ease and loosen up the filtering mechanism, the constraining mechanism, and give us access to the frequency domain. But always remember, not answers in and of themselves, but tools that can be utilized if we use logic and reason to understand them properly. I want to give a big shout out to all our Patreon supporters for being amazing, and a shout out to our top supporters, such as White Rabbit, John, Rex, Naruda, and Rupfu, and all our top supporters here. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. If you want to support on Patreon, consider doing so. You'll get access to our weekly secret live streams.